Okay, we're going to get started. It's 12:30. My name is Tracy Hughes. I am the co-chair of NEOACM that is sponsoring this virtual event today. This is called the SYNTH God M.A.S.S, M.A.S.S standing for Music Automation and Sound Synthesis Tech Talk. And I would just want to say real quickly, it would be nice if you guys can mention where you're from in the chat when you present a question, just to keep it interesting.
Or just type in where you're from now so we'll know where that's from. Yeah.
You could do that at your leisure. So first of all, we're going to open up with a short video you'll find very interesting for the topic. It's only a couple of minutes. Thank you.
What is the future of music synthesis?
I think the whole synthesizer movement right now with Eurorack and actually the whole industry is incredibly exciting. We're at a moment with 3D printers and the cost of printing circuits and miniaturization allows a lot more people to come in and create their own ideas.
The hardware revolution came about as a reaction to the computer. Everybody was fed up with being stuck to a computer, being stuck to rigid compositional timelines, and being sucked down into these kind of wormholes of what I call absolute music. So music that has some almost like platonic form that exists in an abstract universe that starts at one point in time and ends in another point of time and is now saved to an MP3 and then streamed from Spotify.
I do think that a lot of what's coming out right now is strangely based upon old sounds, and maybe we're also at a point in electronic music that the main sounds and the main instruments have been created, like a piano, like a guitar, like a drum and a flute, and now it's about how we play them or how we affect them to create something new. Maybe there is no more brand new sounds, but I am sure that there's a way to put together all the things that are out there and all the things that are coming that will make it sound refreshing and exciting again.
Electronic music is still very young, but it has started aging, which means that some sounds have a place in people's sort of collective consciousness, so to speak, like the 303 or the 101. I guess rolling gear is always so easy to grab onto. Oh, DX7, of course. But those sort of things, I try to think about as like a folk instrument, that one that everybody knows about, and when you hear it, it's like a nice blanket. It's like instantly you know what it is and you feel at home. And in a way that is also a very pure version of electronic music, like those basic sounds that everybody knows and more or less can have access to.
They had more character than contemporary synths have, because microprocessor controlled music, it's too predictable. So the beauty of those is this in unpredictability.
I think it's just been tried and tested. Those classic sounds, they really connect with people and connect with people on dance floors. So at the end of the day, you still want people to enjoy your music, and yeah, they just work. And I think even though people are going back to this old gear, they're starting to do something new with it, processing the sound in different ways. So we're still getting life out of those old instruments.
People will always be attracted to classic sounds. I mean, you know, we want security, we want to go back to stuff that we know well, that ties into a whole web of memory and cultural connection and contextualizing and stuff that, you know, makes us feel like we belong. So those sounds will always be important.
I personally do not support this nostalgic thing. It's like vintage is cool, and therefore in any sense, not only in synthesizers. And yeah, but I would better look in the future and see what will happen.
I think the easiest product to make is one that's a clone of something, because you don't have to design anything or convince anyone that there's anything special about it or explain it, because it's something everybody knows already. So it's more interesting from my perspective to see something that is completely different than it is to see another Minimoog clone or something clone that Behringer will make.
To develop something like fundamentally new, you need like significant investment, time-wise, money-wise, and so. But nowadays, when all manufacturing circles are so short and companies continue putting out new versions of old products or improved versions of old products so quickly, and they expire so quickly, very few companies can afford to invest in long-term research to come up with something really new. So yeah, that's unfortunate for today.
I think the synthesis methods that exist, none of them are really new. And I don't think we will see much new synthesis methods either, because we're sort of all using the same technology, really. It's just different implementations of the things. So the conceptual part of it, how it's being interfaced with or how it's being presented, is probably the bigger picture than just what's going on underneath. Things like granular and stuff like that, there are just very few instruments that use it because it becomes like just this one thing, but perhaps as people delve into that more, we will find some kind of little thing that becomes something bigger perhaps. And I think with sort of development towards ARM platforms and system-on-a-chip computers, which are super powerful, we might see some like really spec-driven things that might also have a really strong concept.
We only get something like the computer so often. So I don't know that we're going to have a new breakthrough of medium in the way that digital computation arrived on the scene in the space age. However, we have now this huge palette of techniques that we can work with. Digital computation, analog circuitry, but also optical, mechanical, acoustic, electromagnetic, combinations of all of these things. So part of what we're seeing is that designers are more freely mixing those techniques, which opens up all kinds of new hybrids.
Processing power is not a limit anymore. Computers can do whatever we ask them to do, I would say. And we don't see someone reinventing a completely new form of synthesis. There are new stuff, but it's true. It's different explorations of topics that were, discovered 20, 30 years ago. Wavetables, for instance, or how samples could be used as a basis for synthesis. How you could prepare samples to make them interesting when doing phase modulation, when doing FM, when doing granular synthesis.
Okay, James, I think you're up.
Yeah, I'd like to welcome everyone to this event and just say a few words about NEOACM and this Tech Talk series. The NEOACM is the Northeast Ohio Association for Computing Machinery. It's the professional chapter of the International ACM, the world's largest educational and scientific computing society, delivering resources that advance computing as a science and as a profession. We meet regularly to discuss diverse topics and function as an intellectual and geographical node of activity for both members, the computing community, the general public, um, by offering seminars, lectures, forums, and outreach opportunities to meet peers and experts from many fields, encouraging interdisciplinary work. In the last several years, we've focused on the impact of artificial intelligence and computer-based technology in our society, our communities, our lives, and the things we enjoy. This is our second SYNTH GOD M.A.S.S Music Automation and Sound Synthesis Tech Talk, which is a one-day biennial event about the current state of the art and future of digital music synthesis and the influence of artificial intelligence on music creation and automation. And we will feature speakers in the areas of music automation, creation, digital and analog synthesis. Our first event, the keynote speaker was Dave Smith. And I do believe we have that archived. This year, our theme is Crossroads, Digital versus Analog Synthesis. What's the future of synthesis? So today we're going to cover how sound synthesis is generated and different types of synthesis. Our guest speaker in the third phase of the program, Jordan Rudess, I'm sure I don't really have to explain who he is, will discuss physical modeling and in particular the GeoShred. And we will also present talks on sample-based synthesis, digital synthesis, and I will be doing a discussion on reverberation. So there will be an open discussion on the future in the second phase of the program. Our first speaker is Julie Swango. Julie is a computer scientist and member of the NEOACM. And she will be speaking today on sample-based synthesis with the Phantom. So go ahead and take it away, Julie.
Hello, everyone. I'm Julie. Let's see, put this in presentation mode. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about sample-based synthesis. I'm a software developer. I'm out here in Ohio. For me, you know, music has been a lifelong sort of endeavor and hobby, but so, you know, I'm not coming from any kind of deep background in this. This is going to be more sort of a hands-on practical analysis of this or how it works. And I'll be featuring a keyboard that I have here in my home, a Roland Phantom X, just to sort of illustrate the workflows. And with that, I am going to get started. Let me see here. Let's click here, page down. So when you think about sample-based synthesis, you know, the first thing is like, well, what is a sample? And I found lots of definitions. All of them were very detailed and maybe didn't really lay it out simply. So this is what I came up with, was audio encoded in digital form. So I won't dive into the details. It's just a tech talk. You know, I will leave those details for all of that for someone else. Because it goes pretty deep on that level all by itself. But what I will do is try to briefly explain what a sample is. And here I've used an open source software called Audacity, and I am showing a 10 hertz sine wave. I did that because it was pretty on the screen. 10 hertz, most people can't hear that. They might feel it if it was really loud. But in this case, I sampled it at 44,100 samples per second. and that is basically CD quality, and I'm 16-bit PCM, so it's basically CD quality. And so that means in 1 second, there is 4,400 samples. And you can see the sine wave here. If you count the peaks, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so a sine wave has the peak and the trough. So there's 10 full cycles on that. And if you zoom in, let's go down a page. There we go. So what I've done is I've zoomed in to approximately 1,500 microseconds. And at this level, you can actually see each of the individual samples where maybe audio was captured in a microphone and converted into some discrete values. So that is basically what's happening when you go through this sample process. And then for the synthesis part, Merriam-Webster's actually had a nice one that is pretty general, but makes sense for a lot of things. The synthesis is the composition or combination of parts or elements so as to form a whole. And in music, or in any kind of audio synthesis, usually there's like a chain. We've recorded some stuff and we're going to do stuff to it, and then there'll be an output that, and for us in the audio world, will be hopefully something that we find interesting or enjoy. And with that, I'm going to first illustrate. I have a video where we're going to basically just do the most simplest of things, take a simple sample and see what happens to it when we play it faster or slower to basically emulate getting different frequency responses. Let me pull open that video for you. Let's see here. All right, bring that over. Oops, I gotta get this out of full screen here. Hit escape, come over, and we'll hit play.
This will be sampling my voice. On the keyboard, I'll hit the sample button. That'll bring us to this menu here. From there, I'll pick sampling. I will use this microphone for the sampling. As you can see, the meter's reading as I talk. All the parameters are set. I'm doing a line in mono, 20 milliseconds pre-sampling just to catch the transient. I'm going to grab a pitch. This is a sample of my voice. Okay, so I hit stop, and now the sample comes up. Let's bring up the volume over here, and let's hear a preview. This is a sample of my voice. Okay, now that we have that, we'll assign it to the keyboard right here. And yes, assign to keyboard. Sure, we'll execute, get through the steps, a final warning. Yes, we will agree. I have it assigned. I know that this is middle C. This is a sample of my voice. And you can hear the sample run. And if I go up a little bit, this is a sample of my voice. It sounds a little higher and a little faster. This is a sample of my voice. And if I go all the way up an octave, it will be very fast. This is a sample of my voice. So altogether, we could do something like this. This is a sample of my voice. This is a sample of my voice. And let's try a scale. This is a sample of my voice. Back down. This is a sample of my voice.
Okay, so, oops, somehow I ended up a little too far ahead. So that was a single sample. You could hear that as it went up the scale, the It played back faster, so that was sort of very naive. There's a lot more we can do to adjust that. One thing on the Roland keyboard that we try to do is there's it's called Multisample, and basically what we do is we take multiple samples and then we assign it to a smaller range of values, and then that helps ease that out. I picked a vocal for that example because it's a very complicated sound, and so you could easily hear the timing differences and delays. When you get into something more like a piano or a guitar, you can be a little bit more fluid with it because our ears aren't as in tune to that. So let me show you the next video, and I will sample my guitar on this. Oops.
This will be a sample of the guitar. It will consist of 6 distinct samples, 1 for each string of the guitar, and those will be combined to create what's called a multi-sample. So first we'll go to sampling, then once again we'll pick the sample button. Everything is set up for us already. We're going to use this microphone to capture the guitar, and we'll start with the lowest string and work our way up. Now let's have a listen. That was the lowest string. Now we need to assign the correct pitch for each of the strings, for each of the samples that we created. So I will go to sample list, and let's make sure we're on the right one here. Number 3. A, D, G, B, and E. Okay, so we have the samples. Let's go back to E, and now let's go to sample edit. So we'll edit that sample and go to sample params. And this one says it's assigned. I'll move down with the cursor keys to where it says C4, and it's actually an E2. Which is this note here. So now let's combine all of the samples into a multi-sample. We'll go to the sample list. We'll move back up to the first of our samples. So we're going to select these 6 samples. Now we'll go into the load utility right here, and then pick the multi-sample, and we'll rename it guitar. Hit right. Let me just overwrite that one that's right there. Yes. And we'll assign this multi-sample to the keyboard. And proceed. So now we can see it's taken each of our samples, 3 through 8, and assigned some preliminary ranges based off of what we told it the bass pitch was. So let's start down here with the lowest, and that indeed is the lowest note of our guitar. And then That's an A. D. G. B. And then E. Let's try a C major scale with the multisample. Let's try a chord on the keyboard using the multisample. Let's try a G chord. G, B, D, G, B, G. Now let's try that on the guitar. G, B, D, G, B, G.
All right. That is pretty much what I have time for. There's a lot more you can go with this. One thing I wanted to point out was this library called Rubberband. It's open source. If you go to breakfastquay.com, that library is there, a bunch of tech notes about other things you can do to even improve upon that. All right, I'm open for any questions that may have come in. Dietrich, if you got anything.
I don't see anything in the chat.
If
you have.
Yeah, I've got a question for you, Julie.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, so after you've taken your samples, it's my understanding that you can now, once you sample it, the Roland X, it has filters and envelopes and those kinds of things that you can apply to that sample, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. On top of any of like those kinds of like end processing things like reverbs and other things, you can take effects and run them through distortions, all that's built into the Phantom X. There's also other kinds of things you can do, aftertouch effects that you may choose to have it edit the pitch or the volume. The keyboard's velocity sensitive, so if I type it softer, it's going to change the loudness and of that based on how I attack the key or how I strike the key. So yeah, there's other temporal effects you can, there's also like resonance filters and cutoffs. Those are all assignable. I did not get into that for this talk. I just wanted to focus on the most basic of sampling to get those who may not be familiar with what that is, to get an idea of where that is as basically groundwork for any other research.
So at this point, you know, you kind of you use the samples, you return your voice as sound sources at this point, and that kind of plays the role of an oscillator in the synthesis point, you know, because you have your guitar sounds, and now you can just do garden variety subtractive synthesis against those sounds.
Yeah, you can do that, or you can do additive as well, in the sense like layering. You know, if you want to do kind of like layering, so you know, like for each of those, I could actually overlay up to 4 samples. So when I hit one key, I could actually get 4 samples to play simultaneously on top of that, and that would all be in part of that patch or that multi-sample.
That's totally cool. So after you've done the you record the samples, can you then chop those samples up to smaller slices, or is it just the, you know, the rate at which you recorded them? You know, do you have the ability to are there any algorithms in the Phantom X that will let you take that basic sample and then chop them up even smaller?
Yeah, I did the most simple. We're running short on time, but yeah, basically I just did basic one shots with basically set up the parameters for the simplest thing so I didn't have to do it. But yes, you can loop it. You can pick sections of it and loop sections for if you want a sustain note. You can slice that up into different things and break them up into smaller pieces that you can put together and spread across your keyboard if you want. Yes.
Thank you.
It's all there. I think that's all I have time for.
Yeah. Thank you, Julie.
All right.
So our next speaker is going to be Cameron Hughes, who's also a member of the NEOACM. And Cameron is going to be talking a little bit about sample sourced oscillators and digital synthesis, and talking about some of those techniques like subtractive. Take it away, Cam.
Okay, we're going to start with the video for Cameron's presentation, and then he'll be open to questions afterwards. Thank you.
My short 10-minute talk is on sample source oscillators and digital synthesis, and why digital synthesis in general moves us closer to the goals of musical synthesis. The talk is about musical synthesis as opposed to other applications of digital synthesis. I'll talk a little bit about sound shaping using subtractive synthesis and granular synthesis, and some of the advantages that digital synthesis has over analog synthesis. The talk is rated LM for a little math that's included, so when we get to that part, just turn away from the presentation if you need. Musical synthesizers come in many shapes and forms, and they generate sounds in many different ways. We have analog modules with cables, knobs, and switches with no keyboard attached. We have hardwired analog keyboard-based synthesizers with switches, buttons, and knobs. We also have virtual software synths that have no hardware components at all. We have digital synths that provide a platform for virtual software synths, and we have hybrid synths that mix and match all of those features. Some synthesizers use oscillators to generate sounds based on square waves, triangle waves, pulse waves, and sine waves. Some synthesizers use mathematical algorithms and models to generate digital representations of these sounds. Some synthesizers take audio snapshots and present picture-perfect renditions of the sound. Regardless of the type of musical synthesizers, all have a few things in common. They are first and foremost trying to emulate or reproduce some kind of acoustic musical instrument or musical principle. And secondly, they provide a palette for musicians to extend the musical vocabulary by introducing new kinds of sounds and musical possibilities. Just to set the record straight, the analog synthesizer didn't gain wide acceptance until Wendy Carlos demonstrated that a Moog synthesizer could be used to emulate the melodies, harmonies, and timbres found in classical music in her Switched On Bach album that was released in 1968 that featured music by Johann Sebastian Bach. Sure, there were experimental music at the time, but the synthesizer only gained wide acceptance from the emulation of acoustic musical instruments and sounds. It is a fact that analog synthesizers were used to emulate and reproduce acoustic music sounds, and digital synthesizers were invented to improve upon and deal with the shortcoming of analog synthesizers. All analog synthesizers and their digital versions will have four basic components: oscillators, which are the component that generates the sound or the sound source; filters, which are used to shape, carve, and manipulate the harmonic spectrum and overtone; modulators, that are used to manipulate and shape timbre and tone over time; and the amplifier, which presents the audible sound. The primary difference between analog and digital synthesizers is that on analog synthesizers, these four components are voltage controlled. Direct current is converted to alternate current, that causes resistors and capacitors to cause an oscillator to vibrate and ultimately produce sound. In digital synthesizers, these components are controlled by a DSP, or digital signal processor. The DSP are usually microprocessors that ultimately produce the sound. So the primary difference is voltage control components versus DSP control components. And of course, there are hybrid synthesizers that mix voltage controlled and DSP controlled components. Now let's say on our modular synth, or our Moog, or our Prophet 5, we have nice, fat, warm, smooth, silky analog sounds that all fall in the audible range of 20 Hz to 20 kHz. That's a very good thing, because as it turns out, that's exactly the range of human hearing. We can't hear sounds under 20 Hz, and we can't hear sounds over 20 kHz. So we could hear the fat and warm sounds of our nice synths. The question is, when audio snapshots are used to sample those fat, warm, smooth, silky analog sounds, do the snapshots sound the same to the listener? Do they still sound just as fat and smooth? Well, at first, the audio snapshots were not up to the task. 8-bit, 24 kHz sampling rate frequencies just didn't cut it. In the early 80s, landmark groundbreaking digital synths like Fairlight and EMU2 used 8-bit 24 Hz sampling. By the mid-80s, audio snapshot sampling rate frequencies had graduated to 8-bit 32 kHz, still not good enough. It was that first impression of audio snapshots and sampling during the 80s that created the narrative that digital synthesis can never sound as fat, warm, or smooth as the silky analog synthesizers. And you know what they say about first impressions. But with the 16-bit 44.1 kHz sampling rates and more powerful DSPs, all that has changed. Now, contrary to the urban legends and long-held beliefs stemming from the 80s, digital synthesis can totally model, reproduce, sample, and emulate any analog synthesizer. The next slide is what gives this talk an LM rating. For those that need to turn away, now is the time. A sampler, or audio snapshot function, that has a Nyquist rate of twice the bandwidth of our fat, warm, smooth analog sounds, in this case a bandwidth of 20 Hz to 20 kHz, and achieves a Nyquist frequency that is 1/2 the sample frequency rate, will, for all intentional purposes, be able to totally reproduce our fat and warm analog sound. And with oversampling, which is a technique that starts with the Nyquist rate and takes higher resolution snapshots in multiples of the Nyquist rate, any anomalies that do occur in the analog to digital conversion are so far outside of human hearing, feeling, and sensing range that it really doesn't matter. For example, a 64 oversampled snapshot occurs at 2,560 kHz. Audio snapshots and sampling at that level get rid of any aliasing or unwanted audio artifacts. So if the digital-based oscillators can produce identical waveforms as analog, what gives digital synths the advantage? Well, it all has to do with sound shaping, and digital synthesizers have a lot more of it. Subtractive and granular synthesis is to shaping sound what fingers and hands are to sculpting clay. If we look at our 4 primary sound shapers that analog and digital synthesizers can have in common, the oscillators, filters, modulators, and effects, these shapers are all limited by hardware restrictions in an analog synthesizer, whereas digital synthesizers have software implementations, allowing for 8, 10, 12, 24 oscillators, dozens of filters and types of filters, user-defined LFOs, user-defined multi-stage envelopes, scores of parameters per component. An analog synth would need thousands of knobs to have equivalent functionality. And it might be noted that classic analog synthesizers have no built-in effects, whereas effects are a stark part of digital synths. Digital synths simply have more sound shaping capability and more control parameters for that sound shaping capability. And at the end of the day, it's not how the original sound was generated with analog or DSP-based oscillators. It's what is done with the sound and how it's shaped and controlled after it's generated. In sample-based subtractive and granular synthesis, there are 4 basic ingredients to shaping sound. The filter, which allows for fine precision cutting, slicing, and shaping of harmonics and overtones. The modulators, which allow changes in timbre over time by squeezing, stretching, bending, folding the sound within the panoramic audio spectrum. The effects, which allow the sound to be echoed, reverberated, phase shifted, delayed, exaggerated, muffled, brightened, vibrated, undulated, excited, compressed, and reversed. And then we have the process of slicing and dicing a sample into small grains or slices, then shuffling those grains or slices around, manipulating them, and then putting them back together into a new sample, where filters and modulators and effects can be applied to produce virtually unknown timbres. All of this is beyond the capability of analog synthesizers. After the analog waveform has been perfectly emulated in both its regularities and irregularities by the DSP and digital synthesizer, all that's really left is how the controllers can be used for articulation, dynamics, and expression, aesthetics, workflow preferences, diversity, and richness of sound shaping.
And so I want to, I'm going to thank all of the people for showing up. It looks like we've got people from all across the country and from different countries, the Netherlands. It looks like I see somebody from India, is that? California and Boston, Massachusetts, and Pittsburgh, Ohio, Amherst, is that Massachusetts? Amherst? LA, Los Angeles, Sunnyvale, the Netherlands, Boston. So welcome. Hello, everyone. And if anyone has any questions for me, don't be shy. Feel free to ask. And if you can't think of questions right now and you want to contact me later, my email is CameronHughes@acm.org. Again, CameronHughes@acm.org. Feel free to, if you think of questions later that you'd like me to answer.
Okay, we have one from Mike. He says, is it true that frequencies outside of human hearing can affect the frequencies within the human hearing range?
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And that's why we go through the process of picking a frequency, a sampling frequency rate that's actually beyond the Nyquist frequencies and the Nyquist rate, just to deal with those kinds of things. So it is a fact that frequencies way outside of our hearing can actually impact the frequencies inside of our hearing. And so that's why we use techniques like oversampling to deal with those kinds of things. Even the frequencies that, frequencies on both ends of the spectrum, at the very high end or at the very low end, that you can't really hear, but those frequencies bounce up against the frequencies that you can feel, right? And so picking a high enough Nyquist rate and then a sampling rate that's higher than that, and then using the oversampling technique, that gets rid of even those kinds of anomalies. But thank you, that was a good question.
Okay, Mark Timken is asking, what would be your first software choice for a beginner related to digital synthesis?
Wow, that's a good question. That's a good question. I don't really want to recommend any particular software package, because there really are so much of them, so many different ones today. And these things are all such high quality. And what's the guy's name? Is Mike? Mark. My suggestion to you would be to look at the one that has an interface that you like, that runs on the equipment that you have, and just give it a try. These things they're They're so well made these days. If you get a good one, they're so well made these days, and they have so much capability till it's really just a matter of personal preference. And so I really don't want to pick one or the over the other.
Okay, we're gonna, okay, James Dietrich is asking, there do exist a lot of free and open software options if you just want to dip your toes in?
Oh yeah, like you know, one of the classic ones like Dex. That's a free implementation of FM synthesis. That is actually pretty high quality. You get your hands on that. On the other end, you have things like Retrolog. That's a very high quality software synths. The Virus. You know, there's just so many of these things, and a lot of them have free download trials that let you experiment with those. I really would just suggest that you go through them, you know, see if you can deal with the user interface, because that's probably the biggest thing. Does the user interface, is it just too cumbersome or complicated for you to use? That's what it gets down to in a lot of this stuff.